The night air over Charleston Harbor carried the scent of salt and storm, drifting through the cracked windows of the Harbor Light Tavern, a place that had survived more hurricanes than the men drinking inside. Neon lights flickered against wood-paneled walls, country music hummed low, and laughter from a table of Navy men cut through the smoke like artillery. Then the door opened, and the noise dimmed just enough for a few heads to turn. A woman stepped inside, hair pulled into a messy bun, hospital scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, eyes tired but steady. Dr. Emily Carter didn't look like much. Just another exhausted trauma surgeon, grabbing a quiet drink after saving other people's lives. She took a stool near the corner, away from the crowd, the kind of spot chosen by people who didn't want to be noticed. But peace doesn't last long in a room full of soldiers trying to prove they're still invincible. "Oops, my bad, sweetheart." The words came with a splash of cold beer across her shoulder. The man towering over her grinned wide. Lieutenant Mason Rivera, Navy SEAL, muscles carved from deployment and arrogance. His buddies laughed as if on cue, clinking bottles. Emily blinked once, slowly, then set her phone down. She reached for a napkin and began blotting the spill with calm precision, the same way she would treat a wound in the ER, efficient, detached, and unbothered. Rivera leaned closer, his breath thick with whiskey. "Not a good place for tourists, Doc. Head home." Jake, the bartender, glanced up but didn't intervene yet. He'd seen fights start with less. Still, something about the woman's posture made him hesitate. Her stillness wasn't fear, it was control. When Rivera's hand came down and gripped her wrist, it was supposed to be the end of the conversation. Instead, it was the beginning. In less than a heartbeat, the SEAL was face down on the bar, his arm locked behind his back, his body pinned by a woman who hadn't even stood up from her stool. Glasses rattled, laughter died mid-breath, and the room froze. Chief Thomas Fletcher, sitting in the corner, lifted his eyes from his whiskey and knew instantly that movement, that precision, that restraint, not self-defense, training. Special operations level training. Emily released the hold, as if nothing had happened, and went back to wiping the counter. The crowd stared like they'd seen a ghost. Captain Brooke Hayes, Rivera's commanding officer, rose from her seat, voice sharp as a blade. "You just assaulted a Navy SEAL," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in?" Emily finally looked up, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Do you?" she said quietly. The silence that followed hit harder than any punch. Rivera scrambled upright, his face flushed red with rage and humiliation. "You got lucky," he muttered, rubbing his wrist. Jake slid a glass of water across the bar toward Emily. "On the house," he said. He'd seen hundreds of fights in this tavern, but never one that ended in perfect stillness. She took the glass, raised it slightly, and said softly, "Luck doesn't keep you alive, Lieutenant. Calm does." Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor, echoing through the old tavern walls. Inside, nobody moved. Not the SEALs, not the bartender, not the old veteran in the corner. Because somehow, everyone in that room felt it. The storm wasn't outside. It had just walked in wearing hospital scrubs, phones tilted like sunflowers turning toward light as whispers rippled through the harbor light, and Captain Brooke Hayes cut across the room with the clean, clipped stride of someone who lived by checklists and rules. She stopped just short of Emily's stool, chin lifted, voice low enough to be polite and sharp enough to carry. Identification, affiliation, explanation. Now, Emily met the officer's stare without blinking, then turned slightly, eyes dropping to Hayes's dive watch and the regulation-tight bun, a military red done in a heartbeat. And instead of answering, she asked a question that didn't sound like a question at all. Third phase. Week 5. What's the current recovery protocol for shallow water blackout during buddy drills? And what risk factor spikes if you use the mandated side position on a panicked diver? And the words hit Hayes like a cold wave, because that wasn't YouTube trivia, that was insider language, the kind used where cameras weren't allowed, a beat stretched, and then Hayes's poise thinned by a hair. Not enough for civilians to notice, but every operator in the room felt the seam. Jake the bartender broke the tension by sliding out a case from beneath the bar, with the casualness of a magician revealing a card and unloaded Glock used for his CCW classes. "You talk like you've been around it," he said, placing the pistol on a bar mat. "Slide forward, chamber clear, field strip it, clock starts when you touch it." A few men chuckled because they'd seen the fastest hands try and fail on a bar top, but the laughter died. The instant Emily's left hand closed on the slide, and her right thumb popped the takedown lever like a metronome in human form, pieces coming apart without flourish. Recoil spring, barrel, slide, frame, pinned down by gravity and alignment, not a single part clattering out of line, and Jake's lips moved as he counted, disbelief dragging the numbers slow. 15.5. And then she reversed the motion, everything back together, a soft racking of the slide that sounded more like punctuation than bravado. In the corner, Chief Thomas Fletcher put his glass down and leaned forward, as if a radio he'd thought broken had just crackled back to life. Rivera tried to pull the air back into his lungs. The room had taken it from him and went for noise over sense. Party tricks, he scoffed. But even his team didn't buy it, because what they'd seen wasn't speed for speed's sake. It was the boring economy of someone who'd done it 1,000 times when boredom meant you were still alive. The crowd began to reconfigure itself into a ring without anyone telling it to, the way water makes a circle when something important drops in. A man stood from near the dartboard, thick through the shoulders and neck, the kind of bulk that speaks in a different grammar. Viktor Demidov, a private military contractor with scars that looked like exclamation points, voice thick with an accent that made every word sound like a dare. "Little Doctor Big Talk," he rumbled, stepping forward as the tavern floorboards protested, "Show respect or be taught it." Jake's hand hovered near the bat he kept stashed by the register, but Fletcher gave a small, surgical shake of his head, let it play, because sometimes a truth needs a stage. Demidov reached, palm out, to spin Emily on her stool, a move designed to turn the seated into the standing, the calm into the flustered, control into chaos, and what happened next looked, on the first watch, like almost nothing. A heel slid a whisper on old wood, a hip shifted, Emily's shoulder dipped, her glass never left her fingers, and Demidov's breath left his chest with a sound like a tire giving up. His legs forgetting how to be legs as he knelt, not by choice, eyes bright with the sudden intelligence pain gives, while Emily remained seated as if adjusting to a new song on the jukebox. Cameras caught the microgeometry, the leverage, the pressure points, the way her line of force always ended in gravity instead of muscle, and even the men who'd scoffed found themselves quieter than they meant to be. "Enough," Hayes said, a shade too late to own the moment, and the word rang like a fork on crystal. Rivera, throat dry, reached for the old refuge of contest, voice pitched for the crowd, arm wrestling, strength, simple rules, real stakes. Emily didn't look up. No, the single syllable wasn't defiance. It was refusal to enter a game whose prize was smaller than her piece. That's when the room's tension shifted from spectacle to inquiry, everyone feeling the presence of something that didn't fit bar math. The veteran at the end of the counter, Thompson, the one who spoke to ghosts, murmured without looking at anyone, "She smells like the other side of the world," and someone near the door laughed to cut the chill his words brought. But it didn't work. Hayes tried again, choosing doctrine. "Everyone under that umbrella has a call sign," she said, folding her arms. "Aviators, operators, the whole culture runs on it if you're what you pretend. Name it." Emily's gaze moved, not to Hayes or Rivera or the contractor still gathering himself, but to the door, to the night beyond, to the water that beats every wall without ever needing permission, and for a breath she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with a hospital shift. Then the tiredness folded away and left only precision. "You're asking the wrong question," she said, and the sentence should have sounded smug, but somehow it didn't. It sounded sad. Outside, lightning stitched the horizon, a white seam joining sky and harbor, and the door opened as if the storm itself had pushed it. Two men stepped in without uniforms, and with all the authority uniforms borrow, a base colonel and a civilian in jeans, whose posture announced rank louder than brass ever could. Conversations died in concentric circles, even the jukebox seemed to turn itself down, and Fletcher's spine straightened on its own. Rivera felt courage, returned with command in the room, and took a half step toward Emily, squaring his shoulders like a man walking back into a building he'd fled. "Last chance," he said, finding the growl that had deserted him earlier. "Call sign or you're a fraud." The colonel glanced at him once, then past him, then at Emily, studying the way she sat, the way she didn't flinch, the way her feet were placed, not for comfort but for options. The civilian's eyes, colder and older, took in the whole picture in 2 seconds, filed a decision, and softened by a degree that only Fletcher noticed. Thunder rolled again, closer now, as phones framed the moment, and Hayes, feeling authority at her back, leaned in with a final nudge meant to topple the last wall. "What do they call you?" she asked, voice steady. For a heartbeat, the harbor light held its breath, a bar of veterans and sailors and ghosts all waiting at the same invisible threshold. And Emily Carter, who looked like no one you'd notice twice in daylight, set her glass down so gently the ice barely clicked, lifted her eyes, and prepared to say the one thing that would change the room forever. The sound of that single ice cube tapping the bottom of her glass felt louder than thunder. Every phone camera trembled slightly as if even machines could sense what was about to happen. Emily Carter lifted her gaze, scanning faces, Mason Rivera's pride hardening into defiance, Captain Hayes's confidence tightening into a mask, the colonel's authority waiting for a label to decide which side he was on. For one long heartbeat, she looked almost humanly small. Tired scrubs, loose strands of hair, a faint bruise on her wrist from Rivera's earlier grab. But then she inhaled through her nose, slow and steady, like she was centering a scope. "My call sign?" she repeated, her voice calm, a thin thread cutting through the humid Charleston air. "They called me Viper 1. The words fell like a grenade pin hitting the floor. The colonel froze mid-breath. Rivera blinked twice, confusion and disbelief colliding on his face. Hayes's mouth parted, but no sound came out, and from the corner, Chief Fletcher's whiskey glass stopped halfway to his lips. The air pressure in the room seemed to change. Somewhere, a chair creaked under the weight of silence. Rivera let out a forced laugh. Too loud, too late. "Cute story," he said, voice cracking. "That's classified stuff, lady. You read it online?" But his hands, those same hands that had gripped her wrist earlier, were trembling, because even as he spoke, the name Viper 1 was clawing through memory. Rumors whispered in deployments. Stories told at 2 a.m. about a sniper who'd held an entire valley in Afghanistan against impossible odds, whose team died but whose body was never found. Officially, Viper 1 was a myth, a ghost, a morale tale told to rookies when missions went bad. But Fletcher knew better. He'd seen the unmarked files. He'd sat in those classified briefings where photos were redacted and the word Blackwater still made seasoned soldiers go quiet. And now the myth was sitting at the end of his favorite bar, wearing hospital scrubs and sipping water like she hadn't just shattered a decade of silence. "Impossible," Hayes whispered. "Viper 1 died in Black River Valley." Fletcher finished, voice low, reverent, and breaking all at once. "But if she's dead, then why do I remember her eyes from that satellite feed?" The colonel turned to the man beside him, the civilian in jeans, the one who hadn't spoken yet. And suddenly, the bar seemed smaller, the air heavier, as that man stepped forward and said quietly, "Because she didn't die." It was Admiral Robert Morrison. He wasn't wearing his uniform, but everyone recognized him. The commander of Naval Special Warfare. Morrison's gaze met Emily's, and something unspoken passed between them. Memory, guilt, a decade of silence condensed into a single heartbeat. He approached slowly, each step measured, the crowd parting for him like tide for stone. Then, to everyone's disbelief, he stopped 3 feet from her stool and dropped to one knee. "Master Chief Carter," he said softly, voice cracking. "Viper 1, I'm sorry I didn't know sooner." Phones shook in hands. Someone gasped aloud. Rivera stumbled backward into a stool. Hayes looked like she might faint. But Morrison didn't move, didn't blink. And for the first time since the start of the night, Emily's eyes softened not with relief, but with the ache of someone who'd run from their own name for too long. When Morrison rose, his voice carried across the entire tavern. "You're looking at the most decorated female operator in U.S. Special Operations history, the only survivor of Black River, the one who saved 73 civilians under siege for 16 hours alone." He paused, eyes sweeping the stunned crowd. "She's not a story. She's standing right here." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore, it was reverence. Rivera sat down slowly, the fight draining out of him, shame seeping into his face. Fletcher lowered his head in respect. Hayes whispered something that sounded like, "Forgive me." Even Viktor Demidov, bruised and silent on the floor, pressed a hand to his chest in recognition. Emily took a quiet sip of water, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her voice came low, almost an afterthought. "I didn't come here to be found. I came here to forget." Outside, lightning licked the harbor, illuminating the rain now falling in thin silver lines. And inside that old wooden tavern, every soldier, every veteran, every ghost realized they were in the presence of something extraordinary, something that didn't belong to headlines or medals, but to silence and scars. And in that silence, as thunder rolled again over the bay, the ghost of Viper One had come home. Rain began to stitch the harbor into a sheet of silver, tapping the tavern windows like 1,000 small decisions demanding to be made. And in the aftermath of that impossible kneel, the room tried to breathe again, people remembering their hands, their phones, their weight on stools. When a vibration hummed against wood, Emily's phone, screen face down, the old kind of device you buy when you want to live quietly, glowing with a number that didn't belong to Charleston or anywhere a normal person could point to on a map. She didn't reach for it right away, because names are heavier after you've carried them into the dark and back. But the second buzz came with a silent pressure in the air that every operator knows, the feeling of a door opening far away. She lifted the phone, saw the call sign that never needed a name, Langley, and answered without turning from the window, her voice stripped to bone. "Carter." Whatever the voice said on the other end took the light out of her eyes in increments, like a dimmer drawn by a careful hand. No theatrics, no widened pupils, just the slow sinking of someone who has practiced staying upright in bad news. "How long?" she asked. And then, "Are we sure?" And then, "Send the packet." And the call ended with a click that felt like a seal pressed into wax. Admiral Morrison, who had been a calm center, because that is what command sells you as currency, took one look at her face and lost a year in an instant, stepping closer, without crowding, asking nothing because he already knew the shape of that stare. "Rashid," Emily said finally, the name collapsing miles and years into a single syllable. They took him Kabul outskirts, school shuttered, teachers detained execution window, 72 hours. And around the room the oxygen tilted, not because anyone knew the boy, but because every person who had ever pulled another human through fire understands debt like a vow. Mason Rivera ran a hand over the back of his neck and stared at the floor as if it could tell him who to be, the flush of shame cooling into something quieter, steadier, a man who had been a storm selecting the work of a tide. Captain Hayes's throat clicked as she swallowed her pride, stepped forward, and asked like an officer who had learned something inconvenient about heroism, "What do you need?" Emily didn't answer at first, because the worst part about being good is remembering the price tag, and the next worst part is knowing you'd pay it again. She set the glass down, water trembling in little rings that looked like topography maps of places she'd vowed never to visit in her mind, and said, almost to herself, "I won't bury more names so I can balance one ledger." But even as she said it, the rain got louder, and something in her posture shifted from avoidance to alignment, a quiet reassembly you could only notice if you'd watched her field strip a pistol without thinking. Fletcher slid off his stool with the deliberate care of a man setting a chessboard others will play on, fishing a battered coin from his pocket and laying it in front of her like a passport to a country that doesn't exist. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said, the words simple and dangerous because they offered hope. Viktor Demidov, bruised and newly educated in humility, touched his ribs and rumbled, "I know people who know doors." And for once the boast sounded like an offering. Jake the bartender wiped the same clean spot on the counter and said, "Phones in back room, Faraday bag if you're making calls. Make them quiet." Because even ordinary men can feel when a night is about to grow teeth. The colonel started to speak in policy and stopped, looking to Morrison, and the admiral nodded once. The kind of nod that moves mountains and retires careers. "Unofficial only. You never existed," he said, and the room understood the rules of the old game. No flags, no footprints, only results. Emily opened the encrypted attachment that thudded into her messages like a heartbeat satellite passes. Heat signatures, a schematic of a compound drawn by fear and cruelty and discipline, guard shifts that thought in rings, an execution dais that wanted an audience, and for a slow 30 seconds she was somewhere else entirely, counting angles, predicting movement, laying a lattice of probability over stone and sand as if numbers could be mercy. "Standard assault gets them killed," she said, voice back to the tone that made men listen. "They'll stage it for cameras. Shoot the first teacher when they hear rotors." The boy laughed for the story. Any frontal play is a confession we never learned anything from the valley. And Morrison's eyes flickered a grief he had taught himself to keep private. "Then we don't go frontal," he said. "We go precise." Hayes was already moving, pulling a notebook, splitting the room into invisible teams with short questions: air, ground, signals, and Mason stepped into the space she left, not pushing, just offering. "I've got a pilot who owes me 2 favors and a maintenance officer who thinks I saved his marriage," which in this community was a kind of clearance. Emily breathed once, and when she exhaled, the years fell off her like a vest. She wasn't the legend, she wasn't the ghost, she was a problem solver with a map in her head. "Fletcher on Overwatch," she said. "Hayes on comms and deception, Mason. Your anchor on North Ridge if we can get it. No hero work, no cowboy angles, everyone leaves, or I pull the plug before we step off." The old veteran at the end of the bar, Thompson, who talked to ghosts because they talk back to men who will listen, raised his glass without looking up. "Bring them home," he said, and the prayer sat in the wood. And then the Harbor Light Tavern, which had been a place of noise and easy lies an hour ago, turned into a staging cell for a mission that would never be written down. Tables pushed together became a map board, phones shed their cases and their histories, laptops bloomed blue over wood scarred by older wars, and everyone chose a version of themselves they could live with in the morning. Emily's hands, which had so often pressed on wounds to keep life inside, hovered over the satellite image and tapped 3 points lightly, like a surgeon choosing where to cut. "They want me," she said. "So we give them me in the open timed, to a break in cloud cover and a blind quarter-second in their northeast camera sweep. Make them think the story is repeating itself while you rewrite the ending." No one said it out loud, but the room understood that this plan required a thing more terrifying than bravery trust. Morrison made 3 calls in words that meant nothing and everything. The colonel vanished to find deniability. Jake locked the front door and flipped the sign because storms are easier to ignore when you call them private event. Hayes mapped comm windows between cell jammers and generator hum. Mason texted 3 numbers and typed only a question mark, then looked up when replies came back with the one word that builds teams faster than rank: "In." Emily stepped away from the maps and into the bathroom with the flickering light, washed her hands like she always did before a procedure, and stared at her reflection while the faucet hissed, not at the scar near her hairline or the tiredness the ER had taught her, but at the woman who had spent a decade choosing life and was now about to choose risk on purpose. The door swung, and Hayes stood there in the mirror, not quite inside, not quite out. Regulation bun damp from the humidity. "I was wrong," she said without preamble, "about respect, about strength, about you." And Emily, who had learned that forgiveness is another kind of discipline, nodded once. "If you want to learn, come stand where it costs," she said, and Hayes nodded back. A pact made without ceremony. When Emily returned to the bar, the room had that hum teams get before moving quiet, intent, already halfway to the target, and she pocketed her phone, looked at Morrison, and asked the only question that mattered. "Window? Wheels up in 12, he answered. "Donor bird. Paperwork says it never left river route to a strip that isn't on your map. After that, you write the lines." Thunder rolled again. So close the walls shivered, and as they filed toward the back exit past the neon and the photographs of men smiling in uniforms from younger years, Mason paused and turned, voice low, sincerity unguarded. "For what it's worth, Doc, thank you for not breaking me worse than I deserved." And Emily almost smiled, the smallest mercy offered and received. "Bring your aim and your humility," she said. "We'll need both." Outside, the rain cooled their faces like absolution as they stepped into the alley, black SUVs idling like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence nobody would write, and in the brief shelter of the awning, Emily looked out over the harbor one last time. This city. She had tried to make her quiet and whispered, not a promise but a covenant, not one more name, not one more grave for a victory. Then she climbed in, the door thumped shut, and Charleston slid backward into the wet night as the convoy turned toward an airstrip that didn't exist, carrying a woman who had already decided long ago, if the past calls with a child's voice, You answer. The Gulfstream touched down under cover of darkness, its wheels whispering across a strip of cracked asphalt that wasn't supposed to exist. Officially, this was a supply run. Unofficially, it was the rebirth of something long buried, a legend that was never meant to breathe again. As the engines wound down, the back hatch lowered and desert winds swept through the cargo bay, carrying the dry, metallic scent of Afghanistan into the lungs of every man and woman stepping off that plane. The first boot to hit the ground wasn't Mason's or Hayes's, it was Emily Carter's. She paused at the ramp's edge, the moonlight tracing the faint scar that curved beneath her jaw, a reminder that ghosts don't return without their marks. She wore fatigues stripped of insignia, her hair tied back, eyes sharp in a way that made even the veterans beside her glance twice. 10 years had passed since she last stood on Afghan soil, but the sand remembered her. Every gust against her skin felt like the echo of the valley that had made her name and tried to kill her. Behind her, Chief Fletcher stepped out, his voice low but steady. "Welcome back to the sandbox, Viper." The call sign floated in the air, foreign and familiar all at once. Emily gave a faint nod. She hadn't heard that name out loud since the day her heart stopped on a medevac bird. Tonight, it was the only name that fit. A convoy of black trucks waited under tarps, headlights blacked out. Inside the lead vehicle, Captain Hayes was hunched over a tablet, a satellite map flickering in ghostly green. "Target compound, 20 clicks northeast," she reported. "High walls, limited access, heavy guard rotation. They're expecting us." Emily joined her, eyes scanning the heat signatures, memorizing positions in seconds. "They want the ghost of Black River," she murmured. "So let's give them exactly what they expect." Mason Rivera, suited in matte tactical gear, approached, rifle slung tight against his chest. He was quieter now, the arrogance burned out and replaced by something better: respect. "We've got a window at dawn," he said. 2 hours before the next drone sweep. Once we breach, it's fast in, fast out. No hero runs. Emily turned, meeting his gaze. "No one plays hero," she said firmly. "We get them all out, or we abort. I won't leave anyone behind this time." Rivera nodded, and for a moment, there was something like understanding between them, a silent agreement between two soldiers who finally saw each other clearly. Fletcher called the team into a semicircle. 12 operators, all volunteers, all ghosts of one kind or another. Men and women whose records were buried in the margins of forgotten missions. "Listen up," Fletcher said. "We're doing this off the books. You all know what that means. No medals, no headlines. Just people who live because we showed up." He paused, glancing at Emily. "This isn't about revenge. It's about redemption." The desert wind howled around them, carrying with it the hum of distant gunfire, a reminder that the world never truly stopped burning. Emily looked out toward the jagged silhouette of the mountains, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's move." Hours later, just as the first streak of dawn brushed the horizon, a lone figure walked across the open valley toward the compound. No armor, no visible weapon, just deliberate, unhurried steps. Through binoculars, the Taliban guards could see her coming, a small woman in desert fatigues, unarmed, walking straight into the lion's mouth. Inside the command tent, half a mile away, Hayes's voice came through the earpiece. "Target visual confirmed. They see you." Emily didn't respond. Her heart rate was steady, her breathing calm. Every nerve in her body remembered what fear felt like, but none of it mattered now. Behind her, Fletcher's voice crackled softly in comms. "All teams on standby, Viper's mark in 10. Rivera lay prone on the ridge, scope trained on the compound's main gate. His crosshairs tracked the man stepping forward to greet her, tall, scarred, the kind of leader who'd built his reputation on fear. The commander sneered down from the wall, shouting in English, "Viper 1, the ghost who should have died with her team. You came to finish your story?" Emily's reply carried clearly through the dawn air. "I came for the boy. Let them go." The laughter that followed echoed across the valley. "You think you can bargain with us?" the commander spat. "You will watch them die one by one, then beg for your turn." Emily tilted her head just slightly. "You have 17 seconds to change your mind." The men on the wall hesitated, confused. 17 what?" the commander barked. Emily's lips barely moved. 16. The count began steady, unflinching. In the hidden ridgelines above, 12 rifle barrels aligned like clockwork mechanisms clicking into place. Fletcher's calm voice whispered over comms. All teams, on her mark. Rivera's finger tightened on the trigger. The commander raised his rifle, snarling. You dare, one, Emily said. The world erupted. Rivera's shot split the air, the commander dropping before he could fire. 11 other rifles spoke in perfect unison, thunder without lightning. The compound's outer wall convulsed under the weight of precision. Fighters scrambled, firing wildly at shadows that weren't there. Emily moved with impossible calm, a pistol appearing from the small of her back as she flowed through the chaos. 3 shots, 3 bodies. Every movement measured, efficient, silent. Inside, alarms wailed. The enemy's trap became their tomb. Every doorway they'd sealed became a funnel for their own demise. Fletcher's team advanced through the smoke, communication reduced to single-word confirmations. Left. Clear. Move. Hayes coordinated the assault from a nearby hill, guiding operators like chess pieces across a burning board. Emily reached the basement. The cell door was locked, but she didn't hesitate. One precise shot shattered the bolt. 14 faces turned toward her, dusty, terrified, blinking against the light. Among them, a young man with the same dark eyes she'd once carried through gunfire. Rashid, she breathed. His lips parted in disbelief. They said you died, he whispered. They said you... Later, Emily said softly, cutting through the chains with bolt cutters. We're going home. The extraction was a blur of sound and sand. Gunfire stitched the air, the whir of rotors rising in the distance. Rivera covered their retreat, bullets kicking up plumes of dust inches from his head. One by one, the rescued climbed into the waiting chopper. Emily did a final count. 13, 14. Everyone. This time, no one was left behind. But as she turned toward the helicopter, movement caught her eye. A teenage boy stumbled out from behind a crate, an old AK trembling in his hands, his face more fear than fury. For a fraction of a second, she saw another boy 8 years old, bleeding, whispering, "I'll be brave, miss." Her hand found her weapon, but her trigger finger stayed still. "Go home," she said in Pashto, her voice steady. "Go back to your mother. This war has taken enough children." The boy froze, torn between instinct and mercy. Then he dropped the rifle and ran into the smoke. When Emily climbed into the helicopter, Fletcher gave her a look that said everything. Rivera saluted. Hayes's eyes glistened, but didn't fall. As the chopper lifted off, the desert fell away, beneath them a blur of dust and memory. Emily stared out the window, watching the compound shrink to a speck on the horizon. For the first time in 10 years, she let herself breathe. "Mission complete," Hayes reported over comms. "No," Emily said quietly. "Mission redeemed." Charleston woke in soft gold, the kind of morning that forgives last night's storms. And as the first shrimp boats nosed out of the harbor and church bells tested their voices against the gulls, Emily Carter stood barefoot by her apartment window with a mug she'd forgotten to sip, watching the light climb brick and glass like a slow benediction. Sleep had come in thin threads and snapped easily, but the city's quiet pressed something gentle against the bruised places inside her. And for a long minute she let it, breathing to account, naming what was present air that didn't smell like cordite, a heartbeat that didn't race, a horizon without walls before her phone buzzed once on the counter with a text that said simply, "Doc, 10 minutes." And that was how the day began, not with ceremony, but with showing up. Down at the pier, the planks had already warmed under the sun, and 3 figures waited. Chief Fletcher with his ball cap shadowing a grin he wore like a private joke. Captain Hayes in off-duty jeans with a stiffness humility hadn't yet loosened, and Mason Rivera leaning on a piling, lighter in the face and heavier in the eyes, the way men look after they've told the truth with their hands. Beside them, a boy who was not a boy anymore, Rashid, taller than memory, wind pushing his hair from a forehead Emily remembered, streaked with dust, stood with a backpack and a paper envelope clutched to his chest as if it could anchor him to this side of the ocean. No one rushed the reunion. They let the gulls do the talking until Fletcher cleared his throat and held up a battered manila folder like a pastor raising a hymnal. "Paperwork," he said. But the word didn't fit the weight, and when Emily took it, her name inked in a font the government uses when it wants to be both permanent and invisible, she felt her hands go still. Master Chief Emily Carter honorable discharge benefits, restored service recognized sentences that stitched a decade shut while admitting it had never been properly closed, and if her throat tightened it wasn't for medals she'd never wear, it was for hospital bills finally erased under someone else's account, for the right to speak her own name to a clerk and not see a system flinch. There was a clerical error, Fletcher said, a smile flickering. Turns out you were never dead, just difficult to file. Hayes laughed once, the sound surprised out of her, then softened. We're working on memorial corrections, she added. Eyes on the water. Names in stone should match names that lived. Rivera didn't say much. He stepped forward with a small square box and set it on the railing, opening it to reveal a coin worn thin at the edges, a snake etched around a number that wasn't supposed to exist. From the team, he said, the words careful. No speeches, no hashtags, just a reminder that when the room got loud you kept it honest. And Emily didn't trust her voice, so she nodded, and the nod carried respect both ways, like a bridge nobody had mapped. Rashid waited until the wind quieted, then offered his envelope. Inside, a photograph, the kind you print when you need to prove to yourself the past gave birth to the future. 14 faces in front of a rebuilt school, sun-baked walls painted with letters in 2 languages, Amira standing without braces, the teachers squinting into light with that particular defiance Hope teaches, and there in the center a small blue handprint from a child who could not write yet but wanted to be counted. They send love, he said in practiced English, and promises to keep teaching. And Emily smiled without showing teeth because some joys you guard with your lips, then reached into her bag and handed him a laminated badge the size of a passport card with a university crest and a scholarship letter behind it. Charleston had called the previous night. The dean had listened to an unnamed admiral's quiet recommendation, and the world had, for once, behaved. Admission conditional on English matriculation, housing guaranteed. He looked at the badge as if it might dissolve, then back at her, and the words he found were the ones children born under air raid sirens learned to make holy. You gave me life twice, he said. How do I carry it without dropping? By handing it on, she answered. Every girl who reads a book because you put one in her hands, that's you choosing to be heavy in the right way. They walked the pier once, slow, like a family that refuses to hurry a goodbye. Fletcher telling a lie about fishing that no one corrected. Hayes admitting she'd started a mentorship circle for junior officers because strength needed multiplying. Rivera confessing that last night he'd deleted more than video, he'd erased a story he'd told himself about what power looks like. When they reached the end, Rashid hugged Emily with the awkward certainty of someone who knows he's allowed, and pressed his forehead to her shoulder for a breath, then stepped back and became a traveler again. They watched him go until the shuttle turned the corner, and the scene let them off the hook of tenderness. And only then did Emily's phone buzz a second time. No name, no number, just a clean block of text that might as well have been a door. Viper 1, your experience required. Domestic consultancy. Trafficking corridor Gulf Coast Rail Plus Port Network. Survivors in play. Full deniability. If interested, reply, Blackjack. The gulls kept arguing about fish and the bells kept scolding the hour, and Emily stared at the message long enough for the sunlight to shift. Feeling the old machinery inside her test its joints. She could say no. She could keep her hands on warm skin and clean gauze, practice the mercy that comes with morning rounds and fluorescence. She could hold to the line she'd set last night, no new graves in exchange for a win, and she could sense both Fletcher's permission and Morrison's quiet hope for her peace floating in the air like options. But there was also the echo of boots on a wooden floor in a country far away. A boy's voice promising to be brave, a teenage fighter dropping his rifle because someone spoke to his better future, and now a new geography, boxcars and motels near interchanges. Children moved like contraband through the back rooms of a prosperity that made folks look away asking if a ghost could haunt the right places. She typed nothing, pocketed the phone, and followed the others into town where toast and coffee and second breakfasts pretend the world is simple. They ate like people do after survival, hungry and grateful, and talking around the parts that get caught in the teeth, and when they parted, she walked alone past the waterfront memorial, stopping by the panel where an engraver with outdated orders had carved Carter E. into the granite 10 years early. A groundsman raked the dew into tidy lines and looked up with the kind of nod strangers trade when they share a secret they never say out loud. Emily touched the stone once, thank you, and not yet, and let the harbor wind dry her fingers. Back home, the apartment performed its little theater of normal, a plant leaning toward the window, a stack of discharge summaries waiting for signatures, the quiet sermon of a kettle finding its boil. On the table she laid the coin, the photo, the folder with her resurrection printed on good paper, and stood there long enough to know the weight of each, then reached for a pen, and wrote on a sticky note 3 rules in a hand the ICU nurses would recognize: no martyrs, no headlines. Everyone comes home. The phone waited, patient as tide. She picked it up, looked at the city stretched beyond her glass like a circuit board full of lives, and finally let the answer form not in her chest where grief lives, but lower, in the place that chooses who we are when no one is watching. Her thumbs moved. Blackjack, consulting, not command. I bring a team. We do this clean. We do this quiet. The reply came before she could set the device down. Understood. Coordinates incoming. A map pin bloomed near the Louisiana line like a bruise under skin. Emily exhaled, one measured beat, one promise kept to herself, and taped the sticky note above her keys. Then she did the most ordinary brave thing she knew. She changed into scrubs, clipped her badge, and headed for the hospital to start her shift, because saving lives in daylight was still the point, and the night would wait its turn. Night returned to the Gulf Coast with the same stillness that comes before a storm, heavy with the smell of salt and diesel. Somewhere past the refineries and the sugarcane fields, a line of freight trains moaned through the dark, long, low, endless. From the outside it looked like industry, but inside certain cars, hidden under tarps and false panels, it was something else. Something human, something stolen. That was where Viper 1 was headed. The operation didn't exist on paper. No agencies, no chain of command. Just an encrypted briefing that began with coordinates and ended with no witnesses, no headlines. Emily Carter drove the first SUV herself. Headlights dimmed, the GPS taped over. Beside her sat Mason Rivera, his eyes scanning the tree line through the night vision monocular, the hum of the engine syncing with his pulse. In the back seat, Captain Hayes reviewed satellite feeds from a stolen signal, her laptop balanced on her knees, green light flickering across her face. Train 17, she said quietly. Left the yard 20 minutes ago. They're holding them in the second-to-last car. 25 people, mostly minors. Emily didn't answer. Her jaw flexed once. She'd seen enough horror in her life to stop being surprised, but there was something uniquely wrong about this kind of war, the one fought on home soil, in silence, against greed instead of ideology. The kind with no flags, no uniforms, just victims who vanished into paperwork. At the rendezvous point, Chief Fletcher waited with a convoy of 2 more vehicles, veterans, off-duty cops, even a trucker who owed him a favor. Nobody asked questions. They only listened. "We can't stop the train," Fletcher said, voice low but steady. "We board it, quietly, Section C, near the Marsh Bridge. That's our window." He looked at Emily. "You sure you want to lead entry?" "I'm already on the train," she said softly, pulling a pair of gloves from her jacket pocket. It was the same tone she'd used 10 years ago when she'd told her team she'd hold the valley. No arrogance, just certainty. Minutes later, the world shrank to metal and wind. The freight line thundered through the darkness, iron screaming against iron, sparks flying beneath the wheels. On the far side of the marsh, Emily moved like a shadow along the track. A grappling line whispered across the space, caught, and the world steadied beneath her boots. The train's momentum swallowed her sound. She climbed, rolled, vanished between cars. Behind her, Rivera and Hayes followed, Fletcher bringing up the rear. The steel roof vibrated under their weight. The noise, a low mechanical heartbeat. Emily signaled with 2 fingers, "Stop, listen." From below came muffled crying. Hayes tapped her shoulder and pointed at the vent grill ahead. Through it they could see the impossible. Rows of children huddled under blankets, a man pacing with a rifle, another checking a ledger. "Manifest," Rivera whispered. "They're selling them." His voice broke on the last word. Emily's hand rested briefly on his arm. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight they go home." The breach was surgical. Rivera dropped through first, silenced pistol snapping twice, 2 men down before they could turn. Hayes followed, disabling the lock. Emily landed last, knees bending, eyes already cataloging threats. In 90 seconds, the car was secure. Fletcher moved to the corner, cutting restraints, whispering directions in Spanish and Arabic, soft tones that didn't sound like orders but promises. "Who did this?" Hayes asked one of the older girls, maybe 16, clutching a younger child to her chest. The girl shook her head, tears carving tracks through the dust. "Men with badges," she whispered. "They said we were safe." Emily felt the old rage stir, not the wild kind, but the cold, disciplined kind that burns with purpose. She turned to Rivera. "Front car. Find who's running this." They advanced through the narrow corridor, boots silent on steel. The next car held crates, electronics, and in the center a man in a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, typing on a tablet. He looked up, irritated. "You're not supposed to be here," he didn't finish. Rivera's arm caught him, slammed him against the wall. "Who are you selling?" he hissed. "Logistics," the man gasped. "Just logistics. I don't—" He froze when Emily stepped forward, pulling off her glove. The light from the overhead bulb caught the faint circle scar on her wrist, the mark that made soldiers go pale. "You don't remember me," she said quietly, "but you know my kind. I'm what happens when monsters build systems." "Please," he stammered, "I have data names." "Then give them." He did. In terror, Hayes recorded every word, sending encrypted copies to Morrison and 3 journalists who didn't know yet they'd be breaking the story of the decade. When it was done, Emily looked at him, really looked, and said something she'd learned on darker nights. "You can run or you can repent, but the world will know your face." Then she left him alive. Mercy again, weaponized. The extraction was chaos with rhythm. Rivera and Fletcher shepherded the rescued to waiting vehicles under the bridge. The swamp hummed with crickets, the night mercifully loud enough to cover them. Hayes detonated the decoy charges that would derail the remaining cars before dawn, erasing the operation without taking lives. When the last child was safe in the SUV, Emily lingered by the tracks. The wind smelled of rain and oil and iron. She could still hear the clatter of the train, fading, endless. Rivera joined her, breath misting in the cool air. "You could have killed him," he said quietly. "I've killed enough," she replied. "Justice doesn't always need blood. Sometimes it just needs witnesses." He nodded. "You're not just a ghost, you know. You're what comes after the haunting." For a moment, they stood in silence, 2 shadows on the edge of a world that would never know what they'd done. Then Emily's phone vibrated. "Blackjack." 1 line of text. "Good work. Phase 2 ready when you are." She didn't reply right away. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the first pale hint of morning brushed against the gulf. "Not yet," she murmured. Tonight was enough. Back in Charleston, weeks later, no headlines mentioned a rescue, no agencies claimed credit. But somewhere in a safe house, 25 names were being entered into school rosters and family reunions. Somewhere, a girl was learning to read again. And somewhere, a quiet nurse returned to her shift, her badge catching the same morning light that once glinted off a rifle scope. People still whispered about Viper 1. Some said she died twice. Others said she never existed. But for the ones she saved, she was real as mercy, as quiet as justice. And sometimes, late at night, when storms rolled in from the Atlantic, the doctors in Charleston General swore they heard it faintly through the wind, the low hum of a distant train, and a woman's voice saying, "Everyone comes home." Peace looked like an ordinary Tuesday sun on hospital tile, coffee that tasted like cardboard survival, chart notes that read like small victories in black ink, and Emily Carter tried to let the day hold her, counting pulses that were not her own, threading sutures that closed brief histories, translating pain into numbers and relief. Yet between stitches the mind makes space, and in those narrow halls a different pulse kept knocking the soft percussion of a distant train, the heavy breath of a valley that still remembered her name. She lasted until late afternoon, until the ICU quieted and the monitors sang their tempered song, and then she found herself on the roof, where the air smelled like salt and asphalt, and the gulls treated the city with familiar disrespect. She leaned both hands on the parapet and watched the harbor lift light onto itself, tried to pour her attention into the smallness of boats and bus routes and human plans, the right kind of scale for a woman who had promised herself not to live at the size of catastrophes anymore. It almost worked, right up until the door clicked behind her, and Admiral Robert Morrison stepped into the wind without the rank he wore like gravity, just a jacket, a tiredness, and the posture of a man who had come to ask forgiveness and another favor in the same sentence. He didn't open with mission speak. He set a paper bag on the ledge, a bakery sandwich, a bottle of water, and said, "You didn't eat lunch." She made a face that was nearly a smile. "Still issuing orders, Admiral?" "Just a reminder," he said, and for a minute they ate like people who could pretend the world would accept their truce. The city sprawled beneath them, a map without legend. "How many?" Emily asked finally, not looking at him. Morrison knew what she meant and answered like a penitent. 25 names placed, families contacted where they could be contacted. The rest under new roofs. There'll be a net we keep over them for a year. He waited for approval and received only a nod, because praise is a currency they spent carefully now. "There's more," he said, and the gulls cut a hard angle through the wind as if to underline the obvious. "There always is." She didn't lace the words with bitterness. It came out like weather. "Say it." Morrison set a small folder on the ledge, the kind that screams secrecy even before the red stamp tries too hard. A photograph slid free in the breeze, and he caught it with a hand that still had some quickness left. An image of a warehouse by a river, a hand-painted company name that meant nothing and everything, a logo that looked like a favor between men who never say please. "Same corridor," he said. "Deeper pocket. They're laundering people through a storm shelter charity. Hurricanes give them cover. This time the money touches nice offices." Emily kept her eyes on the water. "You have police. We have politics," he answered, and the weight of the word bent the air. "We'll get there. But there are girls in that building tonight, and a truck that moves at 2 a.m., and a judge who thinks we're talking about hypotheticals until Monday. I am not asking you to be cavalry. I am asking you to keep the ledger from adding names while the paperwork learns how to be brave." Emily breathed in, held it, let it out on a count she taught patients to use when the pain crests. "The last time I saved a valley," she said, "I lost my team." Morrison didn't flinch. "And the last time you saved a train, you brought them all home. You also left a man alive who is now giving us a map that reads like confession." He waited, because the next sentence had to be chosen, shaped, and offered without shame. "I think you've learned how to win without dying." The wind pressed her scrub top flat against her back, and for a blink she was standing in dust again, counting heartbeats through a scope while the horizon made and unmade its promises. She closed her eyes and the roof returned. "Peace isn't free," she said. "Everyone says it. No one itemizes it." "Then itemize it," Morrison said gently. "What does it cost you to say yes?" She surprised herself by answering, "Sleep. The part of me that believes the world can be fixed by daylight. The permission to be just a nurse and not a consequence. A beat. And if I say no, it costs kids I'll never meet." Morrison didn't try to balance the math. "I'll stand with whatever you write on the line." Silence widened and softened until it became something they could sit inside. "Blackjack thinks you'll accept," he added, almost apologetic. "Blackjack is a gambler," she said. "I'm a triage nurse. Different math." She folded the folder shut, slid it back across the ledge, didn't pick it up. "If I do this, it's by the rules posted on my kitchen wall. No martyrs, no headlines. Everyone comes home. And I picked the team." "Yes," he said at once, and that told her he'd already memorized those rules. "There's a price for your peace, Emily," he said, softer now. "Let me help pay it." She thought of Mason Rivera with humility sharpened into usefulness, of Captain Hayes building a circle of officers who would stop confusing rank with character, of Fletcher whose steadiness felt like the earth reminding you it would still be there after the building fell. She thought of Rashid, promising to be heavy in the right way, writing his name on a class roster like a flag nobody could steal. She thought of the teenage boy with the old rifle, how mercy had stunned him harder than recoil. The calculus wrote itself across her chest like pressure. Peace wasn't an island. It was a bridge that needed traffic to prove it could hold. "One mission," she said finally, as if she were swearing in a courtroom she didn't trust. "We cut the head, we free who's inside, we hand you enough to make Monday brave. Then I go back to my ward." Morrison accepted terms like a man grateful to be allowed to keep his promise. He didn't salute. He nodded contract sealed in breath and weather. "You'll have what you ask for." He moved toward the door, then turned with something like caution. "There's one more thing you deserve to hear." He held up his phone, a photo on the screen, a granite panel with an empty space where a name had been burnished out. The groundsman had finished the correction that morning. They took Carter E.S. off the memorial. The stone owes you no more ghosts. The information landed so quietly it almost didn't register, and then it did, and her shoulders lowered the length of a confession leaving the body. "Good," she said, voice small and true. "Let the dead have their room." That night, the city went about its chores, restaurant doors swinging, dog walkers negotiating with leashes, teenagers tracing their future in chalk along sidewalks, and Emily stood in her kitchen under light that made paper look warmer than truth. She pulled the sticky note from above her keys, smoothed its edges, reread the rules as if they were a prayer. No martyrs, no headlines. Everyone comes home. And then she wrote a fourth line beneath them in the space she'd been saving for a day like this. Peace paid forward. She sent 3 messages. To Rivera, bring your aim and your patience. To Hayes, pack 2 comm kits and that stubborn heart. To Fletcher, need your steadiness more than your legend. Responses stacked like volunteers in a doorway. In, already loading, wouldn't miss it. Before stepping out, she paused at the table where the challenge coin lay beside the photo from Kabul and the resurrected discharge. She pocketed the coin, left the paper, because tonight wasn't about who she had been, it was about what she was willing to help build. Outside, the humidity wrapped the city in a damp embrace and thunder murmured a county over as if rehearsing its lines. She walked toward the curb where a nondescript sedan idled, windows up, engine barely a suggestion. Blackjack didn't get out. Blackjack never did. The passenger door unlocked with a sound that felt like inevitability. Emily slid in, set both hands on her knees, and faced the windshield. No handshake. No grand pronouncements. Just coordinates curling across a screen and a quiet voice saying, "Clock starts when you touch it." She touched it. The city fell behind like a page turned carefully, and the night opened, expensive and exacting, ready to be paid for with the only currency she trusted anymore. Skill, restraint, and the refusal to trade one kind of ruin for another. Peace had a price. She'd just decided where to spend it. The sedan hummed south along the coastline, headlights cutting tunnels through mist that smelled of rain and engine oil. Emily Carter sat in the passenger seat, watching mile markers glide by like pulse beats. She hadn't said a word since the coordinates appeared on the dashboard display, just stared, memorized, measured. Beside her, Blackjack drove without looking at her. No introductions, no uniform, just a voice that sounded like radio static and restraint. "Warehouse, outskirts of Baton Rouge," he said finally. "Front company's a relief charity. Legit enough to fool auditors. Dirty enough to move human cargo in storm trucks." Emily's gaze didn't move from the window. "How many inside?" "Unknown. Intel says 20 girls, maybe more. 1 armed crew. Local law bought and paid for." "So no cavalry," she murmured. "You never needed cavalry," Blackjack said, and the corner of his mouth lifted not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. They drove the rest of the way in silence, through sugarcane fields, whispering secrets to the dark. Ahead, the horizon pulsed with lightning, not storm yet, just warning. At a rural airstrip, a row of trucks waited beneath tarps. Fletcher, Rivera, and Hayes were already there, gear laid out in military neatness on the hood of an old pickup. "You took your time," Fletcher said. "Had to remember how to breathe," Emily answered. Her voice carried the calm of someone who'd already survived her own ending once. Rivera tossed her a vest, no insignia, lightweight ceramic. "We've got 2 routes in," he said, "main gates locked. North wall's swamp, side good cover, bad footing." "Swamp," Emily decided instantly. "Quiet beats easy." Hayes nodded. "Comms, check. Drones overhead for live feed. Blackout zone starts in 20. Fletcher's eyes lingered on Emily. "We can still call this off." She looked at him steady, kind, immovable. "You could. I can't." They moved out. The swamp swallowed sound, thick with the scent of rot and salt. Every step sank, released with a quiet sigh of mud. They advanced in single file, Fletcher's steady frame leading, Rivera scanning flanks, Hayes whispering updates through the comms. Emily's mind slipped into that familiar, terrifying focus where everything slowed, heartbeats counted, distances translated into breathing rhythms. The warehouse rose ahead like a bruise against the horizon, its windows dimly glowing. Rivera crouched, hand raised. 2 guards on patrol, lazy, distracted, unaware of ghosts in the reeds. Emily signaled, 2 shots, synchronized. Rivera exhaled once. Fletcher followed. The guards folded soundlessly into the grass. They reached the wall, breached through a rusted grate, and entered. Inside, flickering fluorescence, the buzz of generators, the sour tang of chemicals, storage crates stacked to the ceiling, and behind one metal door, muffled crying. Hayes moved to override the lock. Rivera covered her. Emily took position near the hall, counting footsteps 6. No, 7 men. Too many to surprise, not enough to deter. Then came the voice, smooth, practiced, confident. "You're trespassing, ma'am." She turned. A man stepped from the shadows, flanked by 2 armed guards. Expensive suit, no badge, just power disguised as politeness. "We were expecting you," he said. Fletcher's breath caught. "Trap," he hissed into comms. The warehouse lights exploded on. Dozens of red dots blinked into existence, lasers aimed from hidden catwalks above. The swamp's silence shattered into the electric hum of threat. Emily's eyes flicked to the ceiling, then to the floor. No panic, just calculus. "Rivera," she said softly. "Ready." Smoke. A metallic pop answered her. Thick gray plumes filled the room, eating the light, the lasers, the plan. In the chaos, Rivera and Hayes dragged the captives from the holding room, frightened faces blinking through tears. Fletcher covered, firing bursts into shadow. Emily advanced toward the voice. The man in the suit coughed through smoke. "You think this saves them?" he spat. "There'll be another shipment next week." She was in front of him before he realized it, pressing him against a crate, pistol firm under his jaw. "Maybe," she said, "but not yours." He tried to speak again, some line about business, efficiency, but her expression cut him silent. "You built your empire on silence," she said. "Tonight it collapses in noise." She disarmed him, cuffed his wrists with plastic ties, and dragged him toward the exit. Outside, the sky broke open. Rain came in sheets, thunder cracking above the marsh. Fletcher's team loaded the rescued into trucks. Hayes coordinated routes through encrypted comms. Rivera limped, hit in the arm, blood dark under his sleeve, but waved her off with a grin. Just a scratch. Emily looked back once. The warehouse burned, lightning catching on the tin roof, flames reflecting in the swamp water like a second sky. Morrison's voice came through the headset, distorted but calm. "Extraction point secure. Local response delayed. You have 6 minutes." "Copy," she replied. The convoy rolled through the storm headlights, carving tunnels in rain, engines roaring against thunder. Fletcher drove the lead truck, jaw clenched. Beside him, Emily held the tablet containing every file, every ledger, every name from the warehouse servers. Evidence enough to expose a system. "Think it'll make a difference?" Fletcher asked quietly. "It already did," she said. "They're breathing." Behind them, Hayes monitored vitals, 23 survivors, all stable. Rivera, pale but conscious, watched Emily through the rearview mirror. "You ever stop?" he asked. "When the math balances," she said. "Does it?" She looked out into the rain, city lights flickering through the downpour. Not yet. By dawn, they were gone, vanished into safe houses and silence. The news would call it an electrical fire at a storage facility. No mention of children, no arrests made public. But somewhere, in a locked office in Washington, a file appeared on Morrison's desk, time-stamped, encrypted, unsigned, containing every face, every name, and scrawled in the metadata, 4 words that made him smile through the fatigue. "No martyrs. Everyone home." He leaned back, whispering to the empty room. "You kept your promise, Viper." Morning crept back to Charleston like a truce, quiet and clean after too many nights that smelled of gunpowder and rain. The hospital hummed its usual rhythm monitors, footsteps, the steady drip of normal life, and Emily Carter walked its corridors with a calm that fooled no one who looked closely. She'd been gone 2 days. The staff thought she'd taken a weekend off. Only the faint bruise on her temple and the slower way she moved told the truth that peace had to be wrestled into being, one soul at a time. In her locker, a folded note waited, unsigned but familiar. "No martyrs, no headlines, everyone home." She smiled. they had all made it back. That night, she sat by her window again, watching Charleston breathe beneath the streetlights, the city unaware that its ghosts had fought for it in silence. On the table lay the photo of the rescued girls, a challenge coin glinting beside it, and her hospital badge catching the glow from the lamp. 3 lives, 3 versions of herself: warrior, ghost, healer. She had spent a lifetime running from one to become the next. Now, at last, they stood together quietly inside her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Blackjack phase complete. Debrief optional. She typed back a single line. Debrief denied. The living don't need reports. Then she powered it off. There would always be another mission, another shadow. But for tonight, the world could wait. Outside, thunder rolled far out at sea, low and fading. Emily raised her glass to the window, to the city, to the people who would never know how close darkness had come. For every soul still fighting their silent battles, she whispered, may you find your way home. And for the first time in years, she meant it as a prayer, not a promise. If you've followed her story to this point, if you've felt that quiet heartbeat between strength and mercy, then you already understand what she stands for. Not glory, not revenge, just the courage to choose kindness in a world that worships power. Stories like hers deserve to keep breathing, and every time you like, share, or subscribe, you're helping another quiet hero find a voice in the noise. She closed the window, let the soft hum of rain fill the room, and whispered her final thought to the night. Every ghost needs a purpose. Mine is peace. Then she turned off the light, leaving only the faint reflection of herself on the glass, no longer the sniper of Blackwater or the nurse of Charleston, but something new. Somewhere, a child she'd saved was learning to read. Somewhere, a teammate was finally sleeping without nightmares. And somewhere, a viewer maybe you was remembering that true strength isn't the power to kill, but the grace to protect. The world outside went on, unaware that a legend had quietly retired back into the crowd. And in that silence, Viper One disappeared again, not to vanish, but to become what she was always meant to be, proof that even ghosts can heal. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay kind, and see you in the next story.